Only know you've been high when you're feeling low. Only hate the road when you're missing home. Only know you love her when you let her go.
It's good, that. It's very good. It's 10:10. Good morning to you if you're just joining us. Timothy Spall and Nick Hamm are in the studio with me. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Listen, fellas, I watched it last night. I had a special link to the film. I watched it on the iPad as some people in the media were allowed to. I sat down at 9 o'clock last night to watch The Journey, the story of Dr. Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness. I thought I'll skim through this to see what it's about. And an hour and a half later, I had watched every single second of it. And why would I be surprised that it was brilliant? Timothy Spall's in it. Timothy, I'm not going to blow smoke up your cassock, as I said to you when you came through the door, but I haven't seen you in anything that hasn't worked. And boys, oh boys, I've had Dr. Paisley sit in that very seat. I've interviewed him in this studio. I know his gestures. I know the movements. I know the look. And how did you manage to capture that so well?
Well, listen, thank you very much for that wonderful commendation. Well, I just studied him, you know. I looked at him, but the script is a fantastic script, and it catches his essence anyway, and his language and everything. But I do what I always do with any. I think about it, and I look at I trawl through the extant material, and then I try and make a communication between me and him, and it's a private thing, but it's about an embodiment rather than an impersonation. It's like trying to feel what he feels like from inside. That's all I do.
Well, you managed to master it, and I'm sure as the director, Nick, you were glad that it worked as well as it did. Of course, the screenplay takes poetic license. They didn't really go on a journey in a car across Scotland, but the story is very well told, mainly in the back of that car and in those woods.
It is, yeah. I mean, Colin did a damn good job, really, of actually making something very confined, quite dramatic. And I think in the end, what the movie tries to do is celebrate the relationship between those two guys. And to do that, you can't really do that sort of as a biopic. You can't really sort of stretch their relationship over those many years and try and make that interesting. What you can do is take the essence of that relationship and sort of fictionalize it and sort of put it into a setting which allows you to basically make a piece of entertainment.
Well, the backdrop for it is Ian Paisley is on a journey home for his 50th wedding anniversary, and he ends up in a car with Martin McGuinness, and here's part of the conversation.
Here's married, huh? Look, you'd get less time for murder. I shouldn't have said that. There's only one possible comeback. That I would know all about murder.
Timothy, you can move back a wee bit from the mic.
Walked right into it. Like stepping on a landmine. Look, there I go again.
Do you think any of this is a laughing matter, Mr. McGuinness?
No, absolutely not. I'm just trying to break the ice.
I'm just trying to get home.
We're all just trying to get home. Isn't that profound?
Yes, some great lines in it, and as I say, well delivered by Timothy and by Colin Meaney, who's playing Martin McGuinness as well. The relationship between Ian Paisley and his wife was very well told during his life here in Belfast. You got to meet Baroness Paisley yesterday. What sort of feedback did you get from the family?
Well, I was really, really delighted that she wanted to meet me. I met her with Ian Jr. at Dr. Paisley's library, and it was always in the back of my mind. You know, politics aside, whatever I know, and the feelings are huge here. But one thing that was always in my mind was that, as a human being, I didn't want to in any way offend her. I was always determined to try and, as I said before, attach my, to get a feeling from within. And I was absolutely delighted to meet her. And she said she didn't want to see the film because, for no other reason than it's still very, very raw with her. You know, obviously, it's over 60 years marriage. It's like losing half of your heart when you somebody like that. So, but she was incredibly gracious and showed me around the library, as was Ian Jr. So I felt very touched and very honoured to meet her, and I was so pleased that it not overtly but inadvertently got a blessing from it, and we talked, and she showed me many of these things, and I was extremely touched and honoured.
Yeah, I think at some point maybe she will find time to watch it. I think she'd like it. I genuinely think she would. You know, Nick, there's one moment in it, and you're probably as a director responsible for this, where Timothy, as Ian Paisley, is looking out the window at St Andrews, and he's looking out on a very wet scene in Scotland, and then it cuts to the famous footage of City Hall with the never, 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 or whatever. So at that moment, you could see the two people being the same person. That must have been the sort of moment that you were searching for within the movie to get the message across that we weren't looking at Timothy Spall, but we were looking at Ian Paisley.
It was really interesting. When you do a movie about real people, and you very rarely put the real person into the movie, because for obvious reasons. If you stick the real individual in there and the actor playing the individual, then the audience can sometimes step out of the film. They can literally go, oh, hold on a second, that guy. But with Tim, there was such a sort of, he almost became Paisley, almost morphed into the character in some way. And he was so realistic at it that we were actually able to put the real image and hear the real voice of Paisley against Tim's performance, which is sort of incredible. If you think about that in normal drama terms, that doesn't normally happen. And that's a moment you're describing where he's looking back at a particular moment in his history in which he was defiant and absolutely uncompromising, at a moment now where he's anything but those things, and he's thinking, okay, how do we move forward from this?
And you weren't afraid, or as Colin Bateman, who you made reference to, as far as the screenplay is concerned, it was hugely important that you weren't afraid to touch on the horror of the past, because Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness both died being respected. They weren't always respected during their lifetime, and there was so much that they were involved in, or so much that they would have initiated, that people would have been offended by. And I think the discussion about Enniskillen was incredibly poignant. The crocodile tears line, and McGuinness's retorts to Paisley as well. That in itself is vital within the film.
I mean, I think that scene's probably the scene you're talking about is the scene in the graveyard when he talks about what happened at Enniskillen and who was ultimately responsible for that and how that went down. And you're absolutely right. It's probably the most important scene in the movie, and it's also probably one of the most emotional scenes in the movie. Look, if you're going to do a story about these, if you're going to take off the gloves, as it were, and remove the kind of the politeness, and you're going to do a story in which you allow these two men to debate both their positions, you have to do that honestly, and you have to do that with a sense of responsibility to both sides. And you're totally right. You know, both these guys were not that liked outside of their own initial constituencies. They weren't that adored, as it were. In fact, they were polarizing figures most of the time, and it wasn't till towards the end of both of their political careers that they became anything but polarizing, and they represented something much more positive. And I suppose in the end, the reason you make the movie is because this piece was achieved here, and is achieved here, and it's something to celebrate ultimately, and something to shout to the world about, that actually, look, this is what we came through and this is what we did.
Did you give much consideration to naming the 12 people at Enniskillen? Because that sticks in my mind, and it would be difficult for those families to watch that film.
Yeah, it was a really interesting question, that, because it's a question of how valid do you make that moment, and it's a sort of almost like, tribute is the wrong word, but there's a sort of sense of, look, this was an horrific incident in which people genuinely suffered and had terrible, and the consequences of it were awful, as were so many of the incidents that happened here. And I think that you're right by in some way placing that at in the scene of the movie. You're respecting and you're acknowledging actual real people and you're actually saying, look, we are, you know, we are moving on from this, and this is, and part of the movie's, I guess, job is to acknowledge what happened, and also to say, okay, how do we move forward from here?
At that point, Timothy, when you were delivering the names as Ian Paisley in that graveyard of those victims, that you needed to get that absolutely right, and that proved to me you had Paisley in the palm of your hand.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, when I first read that scene, I thought, you know, apart from all the other ways about trying to get the character right, I thought what I do owe this is absolutely, and I think there wasn't a day or an hour where I didn't go through that list in my mind as an homage to those people, to that tragedy. And as Nick says, I think it's a quintessential moment, because there are these two sides, these two feelings, and these, you know, this, you know, amazing, passionate exchange. Interestingly enough, there's been a little bit of debate about, you know, us playing fast and loose with the truth, but we all know that that scene is an incredibly truthful scene. It is riddled with truth because you get the list of names and it's a discussion of what took place. Now, if you did a documentary, if this was a documentary, there is no evidence that that scene took place, but we know those men carried this passionate differences and about this situation, and it's art sometimes. It's art's duty to corral these facts rather than the facts. Now, I'm not saying that art is superior to documentary, but in a case sometimes art has to be allowed to fly with its imagination to corral things. So I can understand why news hounds can be offended by things when art plays what they consider to be fast and loose, but it's art's job to be painfully truthful in a poetic sense.
Totally, I'm with you on this. Having seen the film, I am, because if we want the documentary, our journalists around the corner can do it, the BBC can do it, they've both done it, they've done it very well. If you want to go and see a film, the way this is presented is very, very clever. That's why I'm recommending the film. I don't think Ian Paisley gets off lightly either, because he is accused in the movie of leading people all the way to jail with his rhetoric and whatever. You hit all the salient points in the history of both Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness, and you're not sympathetic towards them, or the screenplay writer is not sympathetic towards them, and I think that is vitally important as well. So I'm recommending it, fellas. I'm recommending it.
Fantastic.
Timothy Spall, apart from everything else I've seen you in, like Ovida St. Pet and The Fattest Man in Britain and Harry Potter and Pierpoint and Lemony Snickets that I saw the other day on the TV, and Blandings that you made over in Enniskillen, what else are you up to?
Oh, goodness me, what have I done? Well, today I'm going up to Oxford when I get back to a film festival, which to represent a film which I wrote, which is a thing called Stanley Man of Variety, in which I play all the characters. So that's a classic solipsistic piece of. I did a Sally Potter film recently that's going to come out in the autumn, and I did a big sort of entertainment movie with Imelda Staunton and Joanna Lumley and Celia Imrie about a group of people who go to dance things. I've been busy. You know, I'm delighted to be tolerated on a very regular basis, and I've been for a long time. So, and it's diverse. So, you know, there's all sorts of things about. I'm trying to dodge work at the moment, but I'm failing.
Of all the things, because I first became aware of you when you were sort of the posh guy in Ovida St. Pet, so because that's the era that I'm from. But of all the things that you did down the years, and you've played so many characters, which ones would have stood out for you?
Well, I can't genuinely define them. I think this, and it's not just because I'm here representing it, was a huge thing for me to do. And there's things like Pierpoint, you know, all these. I love playing characters that people have massive assumptions about, and people who are very difficult, people who fly in the face of, popular opinion and so on and so forth. But I mean, like, they all feel bizarrely precious to me. Ovida St. Pet was funny because it was. I was 24 when I did it, and everybody says that that's the thing that made you. Now it's become a classic, but at the time, I found myself in this horrible position. At 27, I had 3 kids. I was famous, and I couldn't get arrested I couldn't get work. I didn't work for a year afterwards. So, you know, contrary to popular opinion, these things don't always work. But now I look back at it, and it's always on somewhere, that program.
It is interesting you say you couldn't get work yet, and all the main people who acted in that all went on to be very successful. A bit like all the main people in Blackadder.
Yeah.
The top guys in Avita Sinpet and indeed the top guys in Blackadder became very successful, and your success it just seems to roll.
Well, what's lovely is it's diverse. I'm lucky. I get a chance to do many different things, and I've always loved the cinema. So to do film has always been a big love of mine. And now, obviously, the modern cinema, it's so. I mean, the way things are viewed now, things are changing. But so it's very important that what I love about cinema is that people make an effort to go and see it, and it's an event. People sit together. You know, what's interesting with this film is that Nick and I have seen this in Venice, and we've seen it in Toronto, and we've now seen it here. I mean, it was fantastic here, but what was really surprising was when we showed it in Venice. I mean, to a predominantly non-English-speaking audience who loved it, got all the gags and everything. I mean, that becomes. That's why I love the term a theatrical release of a movie. It's sort of oxymoronic, but it's very interesting. As I say, I'm knocking on a bit, and I'm still working, and I'm having a bit of choice, and that's something you kind of work for. Bit of choice. That's simply that. You know.
And the final question I'll put to you: the makeup artist responsible for Paisley's teeth, she or he has got to get a pat on the back as well.
Yeah, you notice then, but what you don't notice, which is even better, is I had a false chin.
Is that right?
Yeah. Well, if you look at me, I haven't really got one. In that one, I had quite a good predominant one because your good doctor had a big, solid chin.
You convinced me the moment I saw you sitting in the room when Ian Jr. came in to tie your shoelaces.
Yeah.
Because I've had Paisley sit there on that very chair in the elder stages of his life and sit and talk to me for an hour, and the gestures, the movements, even when he got up to sign his book of Psalms for me, because he just signed it Lord Bandside, and handing it over was like the way you were moving on that film as I watched it last night. So fair play, Timothy.
Wow, I'm delighted. I'm really, really touched by that. So thank you very much.
It is a pleasure. Nick, congratulations on it.
Thank you very much.
Again, I'm recommending it. It's 28 minutes past 10, thanks to Timothy Spall and to Nick Hamm.